Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode in this web series provided to you by Mawi'Art. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about pricing your work, how to price your work, and kind of the fundamentals when it comes to pricing your work as an artist. Stay tuned. So when it comes to pricing your work, there are some simple do's and don'ts, but one of the first things that I wanted to touch on is actually researching comparable artists. So find some artists that are making things that are similar to you and research what their price points are for their products. And there are a few things that you should be looking for here in order to compare your artwork to another person's accurately, and that would be the size, the color, the medium, all of the aspects that your artwork is actually made up out of are the things that you're going to want to go ahead and research for another artist and just kind of get a rough idea for how much they're selling their work for. You might be comparing yourself to a professional who's been putting out work for a very, very long time, and you don't feel quite comfortable charging as much as they do, maybe because your reputation isn't as big, you haven't accomplished as much, but this carries on nicely into the next point, which is do not undersell yourself and your artwork. Ultimately, the price that you decide on should reflect the amount of time that went into your work and the expenses it took to make the work. Think about a reasonable hourly wage. And when you're deciding that hourly wage, think about the two things that I just mentioned. So how much time it's taking you to actually make something, and then the materials and their costs for the actual product itself. You have to take those into account when you're going to come up with your final number. If a piece is going to take you 8 hours to complete, figure out a reasonable hourly wage to attach to those 8 hours. Another thing to consider here is, do you have to ship your artwork? Are you framing your artwork? So combine those 2 points with the earlier points and we have how much time is it taking you to make the piece? How much did the materials cost to actually make it? Are you framing it? And are you shipping it out to people? If the answer is yes to all of those, your price is going to look different than if your answer was yes to only 2 or 3 of those. Now, the reason why I can't stand here and give you an exact number to use is because a lot of you will have different styles of art. If you're making basketry, the cost of the materials to make the baskets is going to be a much different price than if you're a woodcarver and you have to pay for lumber or tools, etc. There's varying costs for each different art style out there, and so there's no one fixed number that I can just give you, but the goal here is to give you a helpful guideline to help you decide on how much your piece is going to cost. The next point that I want to touch on here is a little bit tricky because we all do it. I'm definitely guilty of it, but it's not letting our emotion get in the way of deciding on a price. So let's say you've produced a piece, you're really, really happy with it, you think it's absolutely wonderful, but it's the same kind of piece as the last one that you made, the same amount of materials. Are you going to charge more for that one than you have your other one? And basically the answer is no. When it comes to pricing your artwork, you want it to be predominantly focused on the piece's physical attributes and those other things that we talked about before. So how much time went into making it and what are the costs of the materials that went into that piece, and not your own personal value over the item. That's not to say that a one-of-a-kind piece can't be sold at a higher amount. If it does have some sort of unique value to it, then that's different. But if you just like one piece better than the other piece that you created, then you can't charge more for that one than you did the last one, because there's an inconsistency in sales, even though they took the same amount of time and they have the same amount of materials put into them. So basically, you want to use that formula for when you're pricing your artwork every single time. How much time did you put into it? How much did the materials cost? Are you shipping it? Those types of things will help you get a consistent price point for your work. And this kind of carries on into the next point, which is have confidence in yourself and your price points. If you don't have confidence in how much you're charging for your work, then the buyers are going to be able to figure this out quickly, and this can be problematic for you in the long run. You know, especially when you take the time to realistically price your work. You've done your homework, you've gone out, you've researched other artists and what they're selling for, you've put in the work in terms of figuring out how much time went into it, how much the materials cost, whether or not you're shipping items. When you figure out a realistic price point, it's easy to stand behind that because you can justify why you're charging what you're charging. Confidence really does do wonders here, and it helps you get the money that you deserve as an artist, and that's exactly what we want to see happen for you. So just to kind of go over what we've talked about so far, you start off by doing a little bit of research. I want you to look up different artists who make similar work to you and look at their price points. Next, I want you to think about how much time you're going to put into a piece, or how much time went into a piece. And then I want you to think about the cost of the materials and whether or not you're shipping that item, if it needs to be framed or packaged especially. All of those things are costs you have to consider and should be worked into your final price. We don't want to price our work based on personal value, so we don't want to look at a piece and say, I like that one more than my last, so I'm going to charge more for this one if the two actually had the same amount of work and the same amount of materials. You have to stay consistent with how you're going to price your work in order to help your reputation as an artist and as a seller. And lastly, we talked about confidence. And so when you decide on a price, you've done your research, you have everything to back up your price, stay confident in that. And don't let people haggle you too much. Don't let people take advantage of you. You want to stay behind the price point that you have decided and remain confident in that choice. So you can see that there's a bit of a formula that goes into figuring out what your artwork is worth. And that number is based on a few things. Number one, some research. So go out and look at similar work to your own and see how much those artists are charging for their work. On top of that, you want to think about how much time went into the work that you're selling, the materials that went into it and how much they cost, whether or not you're framing the piece, and if you have to ship the item out. Now, all of those numbers should be considered when you're coming up with your final price. You want to think about how much your time is worth at an hourly rate. Pick a reasonable number here. You don't want to price your work based on a personal value. So if you like one piece more than the other, even though they took the same amount of time and have the same materials in them, you don't want to charge more for one than the other because that's a bit inconsistent and then people won't know what to expect from you as a price. But you can certainly be confident behind your price after you've done your work to figure out what a fair price is for you. And you've decided on that number, you can 100% stay confident behind that number, and you have all of the research and numbers to justify why you're charging what you're charging. Guys, this has been how to price your artwork with Mawi'Art. I hope it was helpful. If you do need some more guidance on this, please feel free to email me at communications@mawi'art.org. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask. I'm always there to answer, or have a one-on-one consultation or webinar. Whatever it is that you need, we're here for you guys. I hope this was helpful. Take care.